Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh, and that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth." As Christians, we are told not to swear, but to simply say yes or no. But in the Old Testament, oaths were normal, although people were warned to be cautious about making oaths and to be sure that they fulfilled them. Abraham was about to confide an important task to his most trusted servant. He wanted his servant to promise on oath, done in accordance with the culture of those days, to faithfully carry out this task. "That you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac." Abraham did not want a Canaanite wife for Isaac. But why not? Was Abraham prejudiced? Does the Bible teach racial discrimination? It's actually hard to find any mention in Scripture of external details such as skin color. But the Bible consistently does make a clear distinction between people. Over and over in the Old Testament, God insists that his people should not mix with people who follow other gods. There was the risk that they would draw God's people away from the worship of the Lord. And for this reason, God's people were not to intermarry with outsiders. If they converted to the worship of the Lord, then they were welcomed among God's people. And then people paid no attention to what people in our day think of as racial characteristics if they worship the Lord. Under the New Covenant, it is assumed that God's people would be a mix. What binds us together is our common faith and our loyalty to Jesus Christ. So naturally, Christians are told not to deliberately yoke themselves to unbelievers. The idea is that the non-Christian might pull the follower of Jesus away from his or her faith. Abraham sent his trusted servant to his relatives back in northern Mesopotamia, who he knew were worshippers of the Lord. The servant said to him, "Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came?" Abraham said to him, "See to it that you do not take my son back there." Abraham was adamant. Even if the servant couldn't find a woman willing to make the trip to Canaan, he must not take Isaac to Mesopotamia to be with her. God had called Abraham away from Haran in Mesopotamia and had promised that Isaac and his descendants would inherit Canaan. So to take Isaac back there would defeat the purpose of God, especially if Isaac were tempted to settle into the comfortable life there. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there." Abraham, who had grown spiritually stronger in faith, expressed his confidence that the same God who had been leading him through these years would send an angel to help his servant. "But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you'll be free from this oath of mine, only you must not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning this matter. So confident was Abraham that he released his servant from the oath if he could not find a woman who would come to Canaan to be Isaac's wife. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master, and he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Mesopotamia is the whole area between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Chaldeans occupied the southern end of Mesopotamia. That's where Terah and Abraham had come from many years before. And it's likely that Nahor was in the vicinity of Haran at the northern end of Mesopotamia. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. In praying to the Lord, Abraham's servant was not asking for success for his own sake, but for the sake of Abraham. God had shown his gracious love to Abraham at the birth, at the weaning, and the sacrifice of Isaac. And now that Isaac was in his late 30s, the servant prayed that God would give him success in his mission in order to again show love to his master Abraham. He was a devoted servant. Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. It was the custom for the women to draw water from the well in the evening, perhaps to avoid the heat of the day. But think what the servant was looking for. He wanted an unmarried woman who was a relative of Abraham. He wanted a woman who would please Isaac and his father, and one who was willing to travel. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink and I will water your camels, let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. He prayed for a sign that God has chosen a particular woman. Now, while the sign the servant asked for was very specific, it was also very reasonable. Isaac would need a good person, a kind person, a giving person. Perhaps most of the women would be willing to give a stranger a drink of water. But how many of them would offer to water 10 thirsty camels as well? She would be a special person. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. The servant was still praying when Rebekah came to draw water. She was a maiden, meaning the right age to be married, attractive and a virgin, although he couldn't know that then. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up, and then the servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. Notice that she spoke politely and kindly toward this stranger. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all of his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing half a shekel, and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels, and said, please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? By my rough calculations, the gold in the ring would be worth about $250. The gold in the bracelets would be worth about $5,000, and that would be aside from the workmanship. She said to him, I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. She added, we have plenty of both straw and fodder and room to spend the night. Rebekah was from Abraham's kin, just as Abraham had asked. She was Isaac's first cousin once removed. The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman." God had miraculously and quickly answered his prayer. The worship of God and the prayer of thanks were the appropriate response. Then the young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out to the man to the spring. As soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms and heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, "Thus the man spoke to me," he went to the man. This reference to her mother's household may mean that Bethuel had more than one wife, as did his father. But imagine the flurry of excitement in that household. At this point, Laban acted the part of the chivalrous brother. He was eager to find out about this man who had suddenly burst into Rebekah's life. And behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. He said, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels." And so Laban took over the role of host. So the man came to the house and unharnessed the camels and gave straw and fodder to the camels, and there was water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Then food was set before him to eat, but he said, "I will not eat until I've said what I have to say." He said, "Speak on." Abraham's trusted servant and the other servants washed their feet, as was the custom and the courtesy of the day. But he refused to eat until his mission was laid out before them.
So he said, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become great. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male servants and female servants, camels and donkeys."
Abraham's servant made it clear that his master was well off, so that Bethuel would be willing to have his daughter marry into the family.
"And Sarah my master's wife bore a son to my master when she was old, and to him he has given all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, 'You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house and to my clan, and take a wife for my son.'"
He stressed how important it was to Abraham that he find a wife from his own kin.
"And I said to my master, 'Perhaps the woman will not follow me.' But he said to me, 'The Lord, before whom I have walked, will send his angel with you and prosper your way. You shall take a wife for my son from my clan and from my father's house.'"
The servant also made it clear that Abraham was a man of God and that his trust was in the Lord.
"Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my clan, and if they will not give her to you, you will be free from my oath. I came today to the spring and said, 'O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you are prospering the way that I go, behold, I am standing by the spring of water.'"
When the servant told them of his own prayer, he was making it clear that he trusted the Lord to give him success.
"Let the virgin who comes out to draw water, to whom I shall say, 'Please give me a little water from your jar to drink,' and who will say to me, 'Drink, and I will draw for your camels also,' let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son."
And then he shared with them his specific prayer, his test for finding the right woman.
"Before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew water. I said to her, 'Please let me drink.'"
And since he had prayed silently, Rebekah had no idea that he was testing her to see if she were the one.
She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, "Drink, and I will give your camels drink also." So I drank, and she gave the camels drink also. Then I asked her, "Whose daughter are you?" She said, "The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him."
And then the servant told them how Rebekah had been the exact answer to his prayer.
So I put the ring on her nose, and the bracelets on her arms. Then I bowed my head and worshipped the Lord, and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son.
Once again, he gave credit to the leading of God.
Now then, if you are going to show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left.
Having made it clear that Rebekah was the one, the servant insisted on an immediate answer. Now, this would be unusual in that culture. It's our culture that's usually in a hurry. But Abraham's servant had a mission to accomplish.
Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, "The thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken."
Bethuel and his son Laban recognized this was clearly the Lord's doing, and so they gave their blessing. When Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the earth before the Lord, and the servant brought out jewelry of silver and of gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. And he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. When they arose in the morning, he said, "Send me away again to my master." Her brother and her mother said, "Let the young woman remain with us a while, at least 10 days. After that, she may go." After they'd come to an agreement, and after the gift giving, there was a celebration. And the next morning, Abraham's servant was ready to take the young woman and go. On modern roads, if you could walk 10 hours a day, it would take 19 days to walk the distance. I'm sure it would have taken them at least a month. And Abraham's servant was impatient to finish his mission. But he said to them, "Do not delay me, since the Lord has prepared my way. Send me away that I may go to my master." They said, "Let's call the young woman and ask her." They called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." Up to this point, it seems that Rebekah has had no say in the matter. But now her father and her brother consult her. Just think, only a few hours before, she had offered to water a stranger's camels out of the kindness of her heart. And now she was engaged to marry the son and heir of her great-uncle Abraham, who had moved away decades before she was born. And this servant, this stranger, wanted her to go immediately. The fact that she agreed to go so quickly tells me that she was fully in agreement with their decision to have her marry Isaac. So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him." The gate was the defense of the city, but it was typically a political and commercial hub as well. This was a blessing and a wish that her offspring would be many and powerful. Then Rebekah and her young women arose and rode on the camels and followed the man. And thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Rebekah had her own small entourage, her nurse and also young servant women, which may explain why Abraham's servant had brought 10 camels with him. Now Isaac had returned from Beer Lahairoi and was dwelling in the Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who's that man walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It's my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. And then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. As a worshiper of God, Isaac would be encouraged to hear how God had led the servant so quickly and had surely answered his prayers. Isaac would want this confirmation that God was indeed leading in his life. I want us to think for a few minutes about God's leading in our lives. Let's begin by noticing how God led the people we read about this morning. Since Abraham was the patriarch of the family, in charge of everything, he would tell Isaac when to get married and who to get married to. So how would God lead Abraham? Although Abraham did not have the Bible, he knew some things to be true. Marriage was part of God's plan from the beginning, but it was particularly important in the case of Isaac that he get married and have children. After all, his descendants were to become the great nation that God had promised. So it was even more important that Isaac get married and to the right person. The Lord had called Abraham away from the pagan Chaldeans in his father Terah's time. So Abraham knew that God didn't want Isaac to marry a woman who did not worship the Lord. Abraham also knew that Isaac had to stay in the land of Canaan if he was going to possess it. Besides, Isaac must not become snared in the comfortable life in Mesopotamia. So Abraham had to be obedient to what he knew, and he had to trust God. Abraham's servant also had faith in the Lord, and so Abraham could and did entrust his servant with this important mission. The servant acted in obedience. It wasn't his decision to go to Mesopotamia. He was told by the man in authority in his life. But as a good servant, he understood the importance of the task. And when the time came, he prayed and trusted God. Bethuel and Laban had a decision to make as well. They would want to do their best by Rebekah. They knew Abraham was family, and they knew he was a servant of the Lord. They knew from the servant's testimony and from the gifts that Rebekah would be well taken care of. But I think they would also see God's hand in the fact that the servant had prayed and that Rebekah had immediately been the answer to the servant's prayer. They would have to trust God. Rebekah was the one whose life was so abruptly changed. She would have to trust her brother and her father, that they would be wise and have her best interests at heart. But she would also have to trust Abraham's servant. She would be risking her safety and her life with strangers. She would have to trust that the servant was who he said he was. And so, she would have to trust that God had brought this man into her life. And how was God leading Isaac? He would have to trust his father. And then, like Abraham, he had to trust the servant to have his best interests at heart. And of course, he would have to trust God. So how does God lead us? First, there are God-given circumstances. These are situations and people that we have no control over. Isaac's father decided where to find a wife for him. Rebekah's family arranged her marriage after a stranger arrived. Rebekah and Isaac had little choice in the matter. We have to trust in God who has put us in our circumstances. Second, there's God's Word, the Bible. There are some things that we know to be right and true. Now, Abraham heard from God directly, but we find answers in the Bible. I've already mentioned in connection with marriage that Christians are told not to marry non-Christians. We don't have to ask whether God is leading us to do otherwise. He isn't. And third, there is prayer to God. It's quite possible that each of these people prayed to God for his leading. Isaac and Rebekah should have been praying for God's leading regarding eventual marriage. Bethuel should have been praying for a husband for his daughter. And Abraham must have been in prayer over a long period before sending his trusted servant back to Mesopotamia with such strong requirements. And we are certainly told that the servant prayed specifically for God's help. Notice that his prayer was practical. The servant didn't pray that the right woman would be the only one coming to the well wearing a yellow dress. He prayed for one whose actions showed that she was a good person. Sometimes God graciously gives us a miraculous answer to our requests for guidance, as he did the servant. And fourth, there is the value of good and godly advice. The trusted servant followed the counsel of Abraham. He made sure that Rebekah met the qualifications and expectations of Abraham. And Rebekah's father and brother either advised or told her to go and marry Isaac. But be careful of the counsel of others. Good people, and even godly people, can sometimes give us unwise counsel. Even if they care about us, if they tell us to do something that is contrary to what we know is God's will, then we ignore their advice. We must obey God rather than people. And finally, let's notice that God is in every one of these. Because ultimately, each of these requires a trust in God. We trust Him in our circumstances. We trust His Word. We trust His answers to our prayers. And we listen to the advice of good and godly people He has put in our lives.